an SME to get into automation, initially it was just figuring out where we enter. Certainly it's not our natural place to be, but now we've took the step. I couldn't be a bigger fan. I'll just put that there. The main thing it's doing for us is an obvious statement, which is productivity. What I didn't get on top of that was the huge capacity increase it offered us, and also the cost reduction. Basically, it's where we've bought it in is where we've managed to get production parts. Aero engine, certainly in aerospace, isn't like automotive where you make tens of thousands of components. You don't make as many of these huge aero engines as you do individual cars. So the numbers is the problem. And that's what really we met with the MTC and with FANUC and some of the other companies to look at how we could actually introduce it onto our shop floor. And how we did that was bring specialists down to look at our parts and which would be suitable. Because we really didn't know, and that was the big thing. It was getting that independent advice of how we could introduce it and in which way. How we looked at it was bringing it very simply, was locating the correct part that we could do it with. And basically what that was a part that could run 24 hours a day constantly. Because in basic terms, that is the reality of what you need for automation, is parts, certainly from my very basic level, is parts that run constantly. One of the problems certainly with some of the companies in British aerospace is that we do development work, we do low numbers, and that doesn't really lend itself so much to automation. It's the production side that works for us. So to cut to it, where we got to was we did find a part. We bought an arm in, we linked it with the machine company. It was actually CNC Mills. We worked with theirs. We used the Doosan arm and the Doosan machine. We linked it together, and the productivity was absolutely brilliant. It was running on 2 machines throughout the day and night. Once the arm was up and running and it was all synchronized, what we could run more on the one machine because it was more productive on day and night, and it freed up a new machine for us. So rather than actually taking work away from individuals, it allowed another employee to work the other machine. So it was an absolute win-win. Productivity went up for us. We became more cost effective. Our efficiency were better, and we actually increased capacity by being able to use another machine. And that was a very basic introduction to us to automation, but it has absolutely transformed how we look at the industry going forward. Because just from that very basic learning, we can now price work differently. When quotations come into us, we can now look at pricing work with introducing this technology. And so it's forcing our cost base down. We know our productivity can be better, and it will allow us to win production work and therefore reshore work that has been historically gone abroad. And it is that big that it's allowing us to do that. And it is certainly part of the reason why in the past 3 years we've doubled our turnover. We've gone from sort of 3.7 million to almost 8 million in the last 3 years. We've just won the Queen's Award for International Trade because we're doing production parts all over the world now. And that really is because we automated those production parts.
Excellent. Thank you, Jason. That's a great story. Dave, you know, from Unilever's obviously a much bigger business. It's a global business. Is there a sort of different perspective when you look at it from a large business as opposed to an SME?
Maybe I'll cover that insight from the digital side. I think, you know, large companies all have data. They've all got data, masses of data. I think what I recognized that most of it was old and cold and more like management information. It would tell you where you were last week or last month, but it wouldn't tell you where you are today or maybe even tomorrow. And then, you know, we needed some insights from that from data to be able to improve. In the same way about automation, we just heard, is that you need to get insights from data, and the journey that people went on and have been on, and other companies have done this, is about moving from data to insights, and then insights to knowledge, eventually moving knowledge to wisdom, and then you get to the position where you can do foresight and control. And that's a huge thing with digital. And that was the big driver. Was a lot of the data was old. It's cold and old, and it was telling you where you were yesterday, but it really, how much does that help the here and now and tomorrow? That was the big driver, and that was what we started to see. And eventually, in some cases, there's moves to digital twins where you actually hand over control to algorithms of the pieces of equipment. It's not all required in that cases. People need to just judge what they need for what application. But that's the ultimate, is that you can react because you've learned you've learned from the good and the bad, and you know what you want to do, but you also know what you don't want to do. And that was some of the insights. And on the automation journey, very similar to what we've seen before, it's about, in the end, we all want our people to be able to perform the best that they can, and we all want businesses to perform to the best they can. So, we want people to focus on tasks that add value, and that generally is coming from their knowledge and their experience. So, seeing automation as an augmentation of people, as we've just heard, and increased productivity is the big driver in big business as well.
Thanks, Dave. Did you see any specific barriers that made it difficult to get these things going, that were sort of particular to a large business rather than a smaller one?
Yeah, there's a lot of it, in a large business, when you've got hundreds of factories, you see a lot of cultural shock when these things happen. Most of it is about the people journey. Most of the barriers are about the people journey. I think there's also there's a question of cost. But I think once people get into it, the cost is not the barrier people think it may be. I think we need to understand that a little more. But much so around the people journey, people are scared of, what will this mean for me? And I learned that earlier on, and I had no idea about this technology when I started that journey. But I realized, I needed to learn about it before it started learning about me. Yeah, and trying to get ahead of the curve. And the same with automation. People see it as a people replacer, where we see it, I see it as a people augmenter. And the same as we've heard before, use it for productivity and quality before you use it for anything else, because actually, when you scratch the surface, the more long-term value comes from that, rather than, replacing people. The long-term value comes from productivity and quality.
Right, thank you. Alan, you're through Made Smarter, you're interacting with lots of different businesses up in the northwest of England. Do you see anything different from all those interactions, or is it a very similar story?
It's very interesting to hear what Dave and Jason were saying, and I'd like to pick up on, if I may, just a couple of the things that they mentioned. We're working with around about, just over 1,000 companies now altogether in the northwest, all of them in the manufacturing sector, quite broad in terms of what they do. And we've done quite a lot of research as part of the pilot to try and sort of get some insight into how to do this better and sort of keep improving our processes. And I think relating to the sort of barriers conversation, the ones that the conversations we have routinely are about sort of lack of understanding, wanting sort of agnostic advice. There's certainly conversation about how do you assess the value for money and return on investment. The people side, skills, and people basically also being a bit time poor. So that was sort of ties in a lot with what has been said already. I think I'd also sort of drawn Dave's comment about data. A lot of the companies that we've worked with and sort of gone on to do more intensive support with have matters data. Manufacturing companies collect data. There's no doubt about that. And it's badly organized often. Things don't talk to each other. So we've done quite a lot of work at the early sort of steps of the ladder on that sort of data and systems integration bit to get all the data in the right place, current, so we can then start to do the more sort of fun stuff, the visualization projects, the robotics projects, all of that sort of thing. So absolutely hear what everybody's saying and agree with it. And just to sort of finally pick up on the employment side, which I know is a concern for folks, and I can absolutely hand on heart say that the Made Smarter program is creating jobs at the rate of roughly one per project at the moment. So we are into the hundreds of jobs being created by this technology. Absolutely not what, unfortunately, the BBC seem to be promulgating this robots are taking our jobs myth at the minute. And it's quite annoying at times when you look at the actual reality of what's happening on the ground. So that's my sort of high level experience, with the Made Smarter adoption pilot. Excellent. Thanks, Alan. What I'd like to do now is to run the first poll just to see if we can get some feedback from the audience. Basically, we're asking you to identify what you see as the main barriers to the adoption of these technologies. If you see a word come up that you like the sound of, then by all means repeat it, because it'll strengthen the popularity of that word. And we'll just leave that to run for a few minutes, and hopefully we'll get some feedback from yourselves, and that'll give us an indication of the particular subjects you want to talk about. So Simon, you spend a lot of time in food and in agriculture, which are not necessarily the most advanced in terms of adoption of technologies. How do you think those industries or those sectors perceive the adoption of digital and automation technologies?
Yeah, honestly, my old experience, and this is not a general experience across food sector. It's very, very diverse, the food sector. It ranges from very advanced automation, with long life companies, Unilever, PepsiCo, those sorts of companies, down at the not a very significant proportion with very little automation. In fact, my old company was a good example. We were growing products for big multiple retailers, seasonal flowers particularly, and then packing them and dispatching them. Seasonal products, and we had 900 seasonal migrant workers working for us in that business. 900, highly dependent on labour, and that really reflects the fact that there wasn't much automation out there that we could use. Real cultural issues in trying to get automation into the factory. And if you think of those 900 people, they were seasonal migrant workers, mainly Eastern Europeans. We had 26 nationalities in the factory on any day. Those people were probably lasting no more than 28 to 40 days in the factory. So building skills was a real issue. But what that does, it then creates a skill requirement for your middle management, which is around people management. So we had excellent middle managers who could handle people. And I think of the more you think of an army, and I think of the skills was really, it's almost your sergeants, your sergeant majors, and those were the sort of skills we're operating, but in a nice way. But they're not engineers, and that creates a real management barrier of change, because it's not because these people don't want to do it, it's just they don't have the skills to actually think about automation and get that automation in, and that created a real inertia in that company. And I suspect quite a large proportion of sort of similar companies are facing the same problem. Now, those companies now have really got to sort those problems out, because Brexit and changes to immigration policy is going to shut off the tap of what's called low-skilled workers. I don't really subscribe to that. I think they're actually low-paid workers, but the tap is definitely shutting down. And so their route to survival is going to be around automation. Now, how do we get those companies automated as quickly as possible to reduce their dependency on labour? That's a real challenge. And it's not just a question of piling money in. It's a question of upskilling and thinking about business culture and all those other things.
Excellent. Thank you, Simon. Well, thank you, everybody, for inputting to the poll. That certainly generated some interesting points. It looks like skills, complexity, fear, and risk are the big issues, and I think fear and risk and complexity are probably all linked, but so maybe we'll pick up on that one first. But Jason, you kind of stepped into this completely new, as it were, and I guess you were facing issues of risk and fear and such like. How did you kind of address those?
I mean, yes. So we're doing digitalization and automation at the moment, and I've got to be honest. The automation was, in the end, the simpler introduction, and everyone is totally right that you have to sort of soften the concerns of the employees very quickly that it isn't going to take jobs. That is just it. You mentioned cobots, robots. They think they're going to lose jobs. We very quickly emphasize that, but really the way to show it is to get it in and get it working. And what our cobot does is very simple, really, that it just picks up, puts in, takes back out and slots down. It isn't taking jobs from our highly skilled people. The automation is a very simplistic work. And I think once they saw that, and that it did open up more capacity for us, and what we do as well, we do a lot of our own magazines and our own talks and this type of thing, and we emphasised how much we like this new product, and we almost humanised the cobot. Do you know what I mean? It almost became part of the team, and that really is. And I've seen that in other areas when I've done this as well. And it does almost that the cobot becomes part of the team, to the point of when we had some of the COVID problems and work dropped off, there was a joke going around that we had to furlough the cobot, and everyone was very disappointed by this, that we had to shove it in the corner, and we were all quite upset. And I think it is that human sort of way of dealing with it and getting it on board. But I think it was seen that it was super good. It was only taking very simple processes and just making us much more productive. So from an automation side, we very quickly got over that fear and all that type of stuff. We had help everywhere. We probably had 3 different grants helping us do this, to buy the machine, to train on the machine, to buy the software. We had help everywhere. There's a lot of help for SMEs, certainly in our area there is. And like I said, we are surrounded by the MTC and the universities and a lot of support. And we certainly use that. And we're doing exactly the same with the digital technologies. That isn't, I'm actually finding that perhaps more difficult to introduce, really, to try and link everything up. Because with automation, you can just do it on one machine. Obviously, digital is a much bigger area to try and digitalize some of our processes, which desperately need it. And we've got 4 or 5 projects on at the moment trying to make that happen. And again, with outside support, we're certainly doing this. There's a lot of companies doing it. There's a lot of support for us to do it. And again, we see exactly the same benefits from it, that it will help us improve production. One of the big things it will help as well is cut down on mistakes. The things like part marking and for dispatch, if we can digitalize, we cut out the human errors. And that really has been one of our biggest pushes to digitalize those areas, is to cut down on those mistakes. So I think genuinely from our company, as an SME employs 75 people, there's a lot of support for both areas. It doesn't always make it happen, but there is genuine support. There's certainly, people certainly aren't opposed to it.
Great, thanks, Jason. So, Alan, when obviously Made Smarter is there to provide that support, do you see fear and risk and as the bigger barriers, or is it availability of money, or what's your perception?
I'd say that the fear is definitely there. I think people are naturally concerned about the unknown. And, you know, as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's knowing where to start, knowing where to get diagnostic advice is certainly an issue. And I think if I push one message out to any SME owner who's thinking of taking that step, you know, my comment would be, you know, you're not alone. Don't think that you're the one that's holding back. There's a lot of folks in the same boat. So be brave, take that initiative. I think the funding that we're able to support is part of a package of support we offer in terms of, we can facilitate links with students to do paid for work in your company, so it's sort of free to the business. We have some leadership and management stuff. We have grant funding, of course, to support investments, and a good selection of advisors that are kind of subject matters experts in some of the various technologies. So this is the sort of thing that companies in the Northwest and now being rolled out across the country will start to be able to tap in, wherever you are. Not quite yet, but certainly it's coming. And I think, give it a try. I think I've not met anybody yet that's sort of been involved with this and has not come out the other side kind of with a much more positive attitude. I mean, it's not, it's disruptive. Of course it's disruptive, but stick with it. It's really, really worth it. And as Jason was saying about the productivity increases, this is self-evident from the data we're collecting from our client base. We can actually see this happening. And one of the benefits of doing it the way we do it is that our team are always on the end of a phone for clients. If they're struggling with something's not working the way they thought it was, pick up the phone to us. We'll chat to you and kind of help you resolve it. So absolutely, recognize the fact it is an area that generates concern within business, because people, there's an awful lot of people of sort of, my gender and age leading businesses, and it's not our natural, hunting ground, digital technology, whereas the younger folks with sort of digital natives, so to speak, are much more comfortable. And that's where the students really, really help, going into business, almost demystifying, acting as sort of interpreters into this new world. So yeah, yes, definitely recognise what you've said there and what's been said by my colleagues on the panel.
Excellent. Just before I move on, there's a couple of points on this poll that kind of intrigued me. One is overpromise and the other is consultants. So whoever put those on there, I'd be kind of interested if you'd like to post something into the Q&A just to give us a bit more of a clue as to what the issue is there, because I think I'd like to explore that one a little bit further. But just while we're maybe waiting for that, Simon, you mentioned sort of skills previously as being an issue within the food sector in particular, and I guess fear and risk are also there. Do you have anything to add to the points that have been made by Jason and Alan?
Yeah, the fear and risk is well known, and it's fear of investment and then losing your contract, and that's a systemic problem, I think, in the food sector of the sort of lack, weakness of sort of supply contracts, and that is disincentivizing investment in automation. Why would you invest millions of pounds if you're going to lose your contract? So that is a systematic problem which we do need to look at. If I think back in terms of how do we stimulate what was holding us back? I think one of the central problems we had was that we were just looking at ourselves within the food sector and very, very busy, very operationally active, and we didn't realise at the time that there's actually a lot of support out there. And if I'd known now what support is available to us, we'd have probably taken a very different path line. And we looked generally around automation within our own sector, but looking at it now with a sort of a wider lens, there are solutions out there, and there are people with skills out there who can help. It is a matter of finding them. And if we look cross sector and other sectors of manufacturing in the UK, we've got some brilliant assets and some very good consultants who will add value. And what I'd say to people is, look wider than your own circumstances. The skills are out there. We've just got to find them and got to try and bring them in. Great,
thanks, Simon. Dave, Unilever's obviously maybe a little bit different to sort of SMEs and so on, but was there sort of issues about fear? Was it the shop floor, or was it the middle management? Where do you think the challenges were in terms of persuading the business to introduce these technologies?
I think a bit mixed, Mike, to be honest with you. Obviously, when you get into automation, people's first thoughts go to the shop floor. Yeah, want to just just quite a humorous thing is one of the factories we had in, it was heavily unionized factory, not in this country, and we wanted to produce cobots, first cobot. So how do you do it? So what we did is we put it in the canteen. So rather than put it out on the shop floor, we put it in the canteen, and it greeted people when they went for their morning break or for their lunch, and they started getting a little bit curious and then started interacting with it and then teaching it to pour drinks, and before long it became part of it. Then the people themselves, who traditionally could have been under threat, started thinking of the ideas of where it could be used out on the shop floor, and they became part of the solution, not anything else. So there's a bit of a thing that we did there, and the people that factory adopted more cobots than anywhere else in the first 12 months. Yeah. And it was a heavily unionized factory in the US, which for those who work there can be great, and they can also be challenging. Yeah. On the digital side, I think it was probably more the middle, if you think about middle and even higher management. Yeah. There's a lot of people who spend a lot of time manipulating data to get it to show things that they want. When you end up with one version of the truth, it's generally the people who are threatened are further up. The people who benefit and who can add the most value are actually further down. We ended up creating data scientists, and data science is, not the people who create all the fancy long mathematical equations, but there's a level of data science between the shop floor and the first solution. And there's a level of data translator role in there, because a data scientist is generally a data scientist. It's a bit like the difference between mathematics and applied mathematics. A data science can come up with an answer, but it can't put the units on sometimes. Where if you get more of a data translator, those people are priceless, and they're generally going to be your operative workforce who've got the real insights to what's actually happening. And then if you put that together, you've got the data science, you've got the operational technology and the connectivity, and you've got the manufacturing and engineering folks. You get those together, the sweet spot is the insights, and you can't do it without each one. There is nobody redundant in that. You need all three. So yeah, I've seen fear right across the board. Yeah, all the way up in the, people a little bit don't want to put the toe in the water, and what does it mean? What's it going to cost? What about me? Will it work? Well, you're never really going to know until you try. Yeah. And it's not an expensive test to do. Yeah. Just to get the insights. And once you've engaged the people, I found in my experience that in the end, it was me holding on for the ride rather than me driving it forward. Yeah.
Excellent. No, thank you. What I'd like to do now is hand over to Barry to really sort of take the panel forward and talk more about the pathway to adoption and more along the lines of how we can overcome some of these challenges. Over to you, Barry.
Great, thank you for that, Mike. Really insightful and some great audience participation as well. So yeah, remember the Q&A panel's open, so if you want to post any questions as we go through this, that'd be great. But as you say, Mike, I think building on that, and we've already started to touch on some of the sort of resolutions and recommendations. So I'd kind of like to sort of double down on that really, and kind of start to leave our audience with the sort of practicalities, if you like, of that sort of path to adoption. And that might be from a specific industrial context or a specific company from Jason's perspective, or kind of rounder as well. So I'd like the panelists to sort of have a think about that and the sort of recommendations that they'd make. We mentioned grants and we mentioned access to sort of some skills. So if we can sort of double down on some of those angles really and start to leave our audience with a sense of how they might dip the toe in the water, or they've already started, where do they go next? So I'm going to start with an SME perspective. So Jason, if I can come back to you,
yeah,
and you really articulated some of your journey. How would you sort of summarize the kind of help you've had, Jason, and how people can leverage that? And also just extrapolate a little bit in terms of where you're going next and how you're supporting that journey as well from maybe outside interventions. So over to you first, Jason, if I may.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, well, one of the first things I'd pick up what Alan said about customers. That is hugely important, because as I touched on initially, it really is for us, for automation, not so much digitalization, but certainly for automation, is finding the right piece of work. It's getting your customer almost to tie into long-term agreements. And so you've got that guarantee of work before you invest into the automation. I think that was a really interesting point. Being an SME and listening to what the panel was saying, that certainly I thought was a really interesting point. And it is true, because if that work goes like it has with COVID and aerospace, and obviously people aren't flying that much, my poor little robot was in the corner for a bit, which no one wants to see. But that is a big thing. You can imagine in food, that would be a huge outlay for some of these big automation plants. So that obviously is always the first thing. And when I talk to my colleagues in different companies, it'll be that is find the right bit of work that you've got enough to do and that it will work on. So linking with your customers is good. Once you can do that, you can start pricing work you haven't got to allow us to do that. And that really brings on to where we're going next. Is we've learned from this first job what it can do, and it's feeding this one machine. We're now dealing with the company that helped us set that up, looking at, right, could we put a second machine next to it, and what would we have to do for that one automated arm to feed the second machine? We're also then looking at into metrology. Could we place it between two CNC CMMs and have another arm doing metrology, a similar type of method? So at the moment, we're looking at, right, what the system, the automation we use now does, and how we can incorporate that as a very basic start. And that really is a basic start, because then it's then looking, right, what's the next step of automation up? Do you know what I mean? That's just a very basic method. Where then can we go? What other techniques can we use? And we're taking very small, simple steps, but seeing huge improvements that it can make. But what it also brings up is the questions. And that's always a big thing when you're new to something, is finding the right questions to ask. And once we've started this journey in this very simple way, it's given us a knowledge base to be able to ask the right questions, how to move forward. Right, if that arm can do this and we can put it on all these areas, what technology is the next stage up? And that's where we get the help from many outside sources. We're particularly good as an SME at utilising help and bringing it in. If you look at my continuous sustainable improvement plan, I've got 20 projects going on, and nearly every one of them is funded in one way or another. And there is, I cannot stress for everyone how much help there is there. But it's the first thing really is, and some of that help is coming in and trying to find where you can use it. Do you know what I mean? It isn't even putting it in, it's giving you that first technology roadmap, say, to come in and have a look and look where you're going, and then look at various other roadmaps of how you can use it, which is what we did. But once now we've started, the UK is truthfully so far behind on automation and digitalization. The amount of improvements you can do, it really is down to then how much money you've got and how much time you've got. Because we could just spend the next year doing improvements in every area, and we can just see it now. Once your eyes are open to automation and digitalization, you can see infinite amount of improvements you can do. So I think once you've opened that door, as Alan was saying and the others were saying, it's just getting through that fear. And we're in Coventry. We've been here like 55 years, and now a lot have really very quickly taken to it and have very much trusted that it isn't going to prevent their jobs. What it's going to do, it's going to help us grow, so protect their jobs, but allow us to grow and get more out the door. I think that's the big pitch to push to everyone. I think it was also interesting as well, saying that with digitalisation, it's correct, that is middle management, and it does help lower down. So it is across the board. You really have got to convince all levels. It's not just shop floor, it's mid management, and sometimes it's higher management.
That's a really good good response, Jason. Some of the sort of key points there, and we're going to go to a poll in a second. So I'll just highlight some of those, and we'll add them to the poll. You mentioned kind of start small, really, Jason, right? That kind of start small, but lock it into demand. So you got some, I suppose, business case, right, Jason? To start with and prove things out and get that kind of cultural, I suppose, momentum going. You mentioned independent advice as well, Jason. Sometimes you don't know what you don't know. You've not built the knowledge base up yet. So that independent advice is really kind of key to, I suppose, orientating you, helping you sort of start and think about those kind of next steps. And you talked about grants as well. I think there's quite a lot out there for SMEs, right, that we can start to leverage. So that maybe that sort of financial advice around business case, but also that support in terms of what to do and how to accelerate and support your, I suppose, your investment plan as well, Jason, kind of accelerate you as well. Okay.
Yeah, very much so.
Great, thank you for that one. Sticking on the SME front, just want to sort of kind of take it wider, really. So, Alan, over to you. Can you start to double down a little bit? We've got the Northwest pilot underway. You mentioned the challenges and the barriers. You started to touch on some of the resolutions, but if we were to sort of double down on some of those resolutions, Alan, with recommendations, that kind of pathway, what can you talk to there, Alan?
I think it's interesting to hear Jason's sort of story there, and it sort of mirrors our experience again, which is great, sort of reinforcing what we have learned. And I think the for us, in terms of the customer journey that we take our clients through, what we really encourage them to do is to do this sort of, we call it a digital transformation workshop. You know, other descriptions are probably out there, but essentially we'll try and look at their business, you know, from the point of somebody that is totally independent, has no axe to grind or anything to sell them, but to walk through their process, where there are problems, and how can digitalization help those problems. And then at the end of that, we'll go away and have a bit of a think about what we've learned and come back with a proposal for them. And you know, as is often the case, the first bit of the proposal may well be, you need to think a little bit about lean before you start digitizing, because digitizing waste is just not a great idea. And to do the kind of transformation roadmap, which is the kind of document that sort of comes out at the end of it, is really, as has been described already, a kind of step-by-step proposition for the client. And along those steps, you know, there may be some, you know, scope to do a small project here, which you know, there'll be investment support for. Then maybe there's a few other bits and pieces we may recommend to some clients. Well, you know, our leadership management program, which is not about leadership and management, but it's about technology adoption and how the best way to do that is. You know, it might be worth sending, you know, Bob or Julie on that course, because it will really sort of enhance the plan and the change of behaviour that we're trying to get within the SME that we're managing. I mean, for us, the ideal interaction would be to do that process and get that sort of change of behaviour in terms of the way that these sort of projects are assessed and reviewed and valued. Some clients will come back for more advice, some will come back even for further funded support for grants. But I think it's the kind of the key thing is to just have a plan, and you know, yes, plans don't always go, you know, do fail on occasion, but there's always options in there. It's never, you know, you've got to, you know, you must prescriptively do this at each stage. But this is the suggestion: if something goes wrong, phone us. We'll come and, you know, help you just subtly edited that plan to get you to, you know, where we get you back on track. But I think, you know, small steps, not big steps. I mean, we talked a little bit about money, I think, in sort of roundabout terms. The sort of hard numbers from the Northwest pilot are that the average project is sitting at around £70,000 at the moment, and you know, we have grant support up to 20k towards that. So that's quite a nice little lump of support, and I believe this is going to be mirrored in the regions as we roll out, broadly speaking, but I've not seen their delivery plans just yet. So, you know, we've done projects that are, I'm trying to think what the smallest one was, about 5 or 6k's worth of investment. So it really is quite a broad palette, and it is important just to bite-sized chunks, you know, do, learn, repeat. You know, that's you know, very classical sort of thing, but it works. You know, it's the way to do it. But do take that first step, please. And
yeah.
And it has been said, you know, was it 20th in the world for robotics adoption or something like that, and Denmark are 8th, and they don't even have a car industry. So we've got a bit of a way to go, I think, to catch up. And anything that, you know, the Made Smarter program, all of you good folk there, the high value manufacturing catapults, who, by the way, also I think do this digital adoption workshops as well. You know, take advantage of them. You know, make them work for the money. Make us work for our money, please.
Yeah, so just a couple of summaries there, and we got a couple of questions as well. So I think you mentioned the start small. I think we echo that with Jason, but that sort of transformation plan, I think it's transformation can be scary, right? It can sound big, but actually what we're talking about is small steps and increments is really what we're talking about, but we need to order those. So I think there's something about that kind of independent advice and transformation planning as well. Sharon's asking a question, are the transformation workshops free? You might want to just jump in on this one. Certainly from a high value manufacturing catapult point of view, Sharon, who also work into Made Smarter, we have what's called reach funding. So it's a match. So we're looking for investment from, for example, an SME, and we match that with industry as well. So Jason has probably taken advantage of things like that as well. But Alan, do you want to just comment on that? Is that free, that workshop?
From the point of view of Made Smarter, we are funded to deliver those absolutely free of charge to SMEs.
Okay.
For us, it has to be in the Northwest, clearly, and other areas will have their own geographies. But all our services are free. The only exception is that we ask for a 2.5K contribution to the leadership management thing, because that's quite a big intensive course over, it's actually over a number of months, but it's a small amount each month, but we ask for a contribution towards that.
I think that's great. I think a bit of skin in the game really helps as well, right? But you mentioned that is in the Northwest, but it is a pilot. Therefore, it suggests that there's more of a national program that might come. And I know, for example, that under Made Smarter, there's a digital innovation hub program that's operating at the moment. And there's a number of test beds available across that pilot where people can come and try things out for free, try their use cases out, try before you buy. That is free, and that program is running at the moment, and the MTC, as well as other high values, are part of that program. So we'll see more of that. People can tap into different things. Thank you, Alan, for that one. I'm going to bring in this sort of Simon here from a kind of industrial perspective. Simon, you know, what would you say, you know, from an industrial lens perspective, that kind of pathway to adoption? What should people be thinking about? Where can they go for help? If you want to just kind of crystallize that a little bit, Simon.
Yeah, there's you know, 2 points really. I'm just to come back on the adoption issue. What we did, so we had a factory with a middle management which had a real can-do attitude, but unfortunately they were blocked because they can't do, and it was skills. And the simplest thing we did was around diversity. We recognised an issue, and we recruited a number of, being in Lincolnshire, we've got a lot of RAF bases around us. So we took a couple of ex-RAF engineers into the factory, absolutely no domain knowledge whatsoever, but fantastic, high quality, diverse engineering skills. That, for us, 2 people, was very transformational, and it was injecting high level skills into that factory. And so diversity, I think, is very important, and then training your own people around skills is really important. The other thing I would do now, which I didn't do back then, because I know, I would be investing an awful lot in networking and getting people out, networking, and not networking in your own domain, but networking very broadly. It's about finding out finding who's out there who can help you, and there's a very large pool of talent in the UK, and those people are definitely out there. And then it's really trying to find who's appropriate for you and what level do you need support. So we work very closely with a number of industrial food manufacturing supply chains. We now do lots of research. Our research teams in robotics. We do a lot in food manufacturing robotics, agri-robotics. We do sort of what I call low TRL research, and then if we're confronted with a problem which is really an industrial problem, we tend to move that to people like the MTC or the catapults. And so it's when you're out there, get into your network and then find out in your network where that that help is most appropriate to come from. Is it a university with low TRL research? Sometimes. Is it a catapult which can really do that adoption piece for you? Probably. Is it other companies? Most likely. But it's knowing where to pitch it. But you'll only find that from lots of networking.
Yeah, that's a really good answer. There is a question or a comment in the chat from Robert. I got asked to join the MTC and there was a charge. So just to be clear, with high value manufacturing catapults, you know, we're altruistic to some extent. You can come and work with us and we can help you for free, depending on what you want to do. There are membership options, of course, and that brings different benefits, etc. So there are certain charges, but please don't be put off by that. You can actually come into any catapult center. You can just drop in, you can generate awareness, you can get into some of these programs, and there is no charge for it. But a couple of comments, Simon, there you mentioned that networking. I think that's key, right? That kind of establish your network, and people can help you sort of signpost on that one. I think that's key. Get curious and work with a network that can kind of help you, from catapults, from local local councils. There's lots going on in regions now. We're working in Liverpool City region. So there's a regional aspect, there's a national aspect, and there's things like Made Smarter as well. Okay, so I'm going to bring it to Dave now. Dave, from your point of view, you know, you're doubling down, recommendations, you know, kind of the larger company perspective, but you might want to touch as well on large companies have big supply chains as well. So recommendations, David, from yourself on this one.
From a large company perspective, we actually made progress because of the smaller companies. Large companies can be very rigid in how they think. You know, how the journey that I led started was that, you know, back to Simon's point, I went to a networking event. I did, and I'd never previously done it. You know, the role that I then had, I thought I need to get out, find out. I found somebody presenting about a digital example from oil and gas, which has got absolutely nothing to do with soap or ice cream, right? And then they introduced me to a startup company that then became the key partner. And the startup company was like 15 people by that stage. Started off as one, ended up at 15 when I met them. And they became the backbone of the entire transformation. Yeah. And so I think if just because big companies don't need to look at big companies, they need to look at small companies, because they're more agile, they're more innovative. They can challenge your big company thinking where everything's got to be huge and at scale. You know, if you try and go too big too quick, you miss the golden time of learning. I would encourage people, just try it. And, you know, with digital particularly, a lot of people think, well, we need to put sensors, we need big networks, we need everything. You know what? You can learn from history as much as the present. Most manufacturing organizations have got a lot of data. So start learning from the data to encourage you to get into data, which then is the next step towards digital. So I actually found as a large organization, it was the small organizations that gave me the inspiration to go on, not the other way around. Yeah.
Yeah.
On to the point about diversity, don't forget the creative people. I also managed a huge positive switch in diversity, but it was also about honestly, and for the engineers on the phone like me, I make no apologies. The last person I would ever ask to design a human interface would be an engineer. Yeah. Because you'd get all the logic and none of the visuals, right? And it would fit perfectly to the coding that they were writing that week, but it would be of no use whatsoever to the person who actually wanted to see something. So I recruited a lot of creative people to actually help with the front end and to see things differently. And as a result of looking for something different, I ended up luckily managing a hugely diverse organization, because it changed the shape of the organization when you look for something different. So there's a couple of points there. I think on automation, you know, start small, start with the people. You know, we've heard a bit of this already. Start with the people element of it, because they will be a little bit nervous about it, but actually they're the people where the value is. And if you can get to the productivity lens faster, yeah, I think that'll be much more successful. So I hope that helps a little bit.
Yeah, no, it does actually. Thank you. I mean, just my sort of summary, couple of summary points there. I think that diverse team is quite key, actually, isn't it? And actually, you don't need to hire in creators. We can network again. I think there's a point about networking here, and how we might leverage engineers as well as more creative people that can think of that user journey, that engagement journey, and that kind of interface side of things. So I think that diverse team thing is quite significant. And you mentioned the big companies working with the small companies. Again, it's a kind of networking, isn't it, really? Example here about bringing innovation. Really, thanks for that, guys. Really good. So what I want to try and do is draw some of those concluding sort of recommendations. They weren't exhaustive, but I think they were really practical. So can we pop up the poll now? We try to summarize that in a little bit of real time. So Callum, can you pop up the poll now, if that's okay? And what I'd like to do is to get our audience members to take a look at that. So can we see that now? Okay, so if you could take a look at that, and if you could vote on your top three, if you were to look at that and think about, you know, where do I really want help? You know, what's important to me out of what we've spoken about, then we can take a look at that. So how are we looking in real time here? So, okay, so just conscious of time here, we're kind of going quite quickly. So I'm just going to start to try and summarize this a little bit. So we've got a few things here. We got increased awareness of technologies and business benefits was pretty high. I think we were talking about that independent advice there. So we kind of want to see more of that and independence. I think it harks back to one of the fears and one of the concerns, which is the sort of consultancy idea. Sometimes we can get a bit scared of the sort of consultancy. So I think that access to independence and driving that kind of awareness is quite key. Business case is quite significant. That's kind of jumping up the rankings as we speak. We spoke about some of that support. Alan spoke about some of that, and we're seeing a lot more of that kind of thing from things like Made Smarter. At the High Value Catapult, we've got things like Reach funding, and we're trying to lobby for more of that as well. So I think that's quite key. Of course, the people skills thing is super important. Again, we spoke about accessing those diverse teams and how to network and how to start to kind of garner some of those skills. In our organizations, we can't always afford just to hire people in. They're not necessarily there. So again, it's about accessing some of that capability. Support for roadmaps and adoption, again, that's quite key. Jason mentioned that earlier on, didn't he? He talked about, you know, we need to know where we're going, and Alan spoke to that one. And again, there are some free engagement points around that. I spoke about test beds as well. It's great having a roadmap, but actually if you can go and see something and trial something, that's kind of fundamental as well. So some really good kind of polling and ideas here. So I really appreciate that. And we can start to take some of those ideas and really, I suppose, double down internally as well. So thank you for that. I want to sort of go back to the panel. I'll just look at the Q&A, by the way, as well, just to make sure we're on top of that one. But I want to just go back to the panel in a second for any kind of closing remarks. But I'm just going to go to the Q&A just to make sure. So just anything else I want to kind of grab as well. I think I've covered most of them. Sharon mentioned real opportunity for SMEs here. So really opportunity to kind of get engaged, you know, absolutely. Okay, I think that's all good for now. So closing remarks, guys. Al, I'm going to bring you in first. Kind of just your parting words would be appreciated.
I think it's been really interesting discussion, and I've loved the polls. I think that sort of reflects pretty much what we're seeing in life in the Northwest, and I think phone somebody, get advice, go to networking meetings, try basically, don't be afraid. There's a lot of support out there, even in areas that are not yet covered by Made Smarter. We routinely take folks to AMRC Northwest, which is also part of the high value manufacturing catapults. You've got to think of a simpler name, folks.
Yeah, I know. We'll work on that. We'll work on that one.
So we do take sort of people. Well, we did when we could do that sort of thing. Take people to see the catapults and see demonstrators in action. Roadmaps are a great thing to do, as people seem to suggest as well. And if I could make one request, I think of the Catapult network would be, it'd be great to see some demonstrators of perhaps more simple solutions, because some of the ones that you see at MTC and AMRC are amazing, but we've taken SMEs in to see them and they think, well, that's just great, I just can't afford it. So it'd be really nice to see some kind of simple solutions that we can point folks to, and I think that would be a big win for SMEs generally.
Okay, thanks for that. That's good feedback as well, but good recommendation. Dave, your parting comment or recommendations?
I'd say about keeping an open mind. We should never be too quick to draw conclusions on things we don't fully grasp. Yeah, and I would implore people to keep an open mind. I would say it's a people journey that has to start slightly before anything else. And that people journey starts with you, starts with yourself. Yeah, you think about the I in things, not the we in things. I think the importance of network, mentioned before several times. You can learn so much from others, even if they're not in your industry. Yeah, and actually, my experience is you actually learn more, because if you ask someone in your own industry, you'll probably get the answer that you've already given yourself. Yeah. And then start small as a way to learn. Yeah, it can be really small. Don't go for the huge thing. I think you just mentioned that. Don't go for the massive transformational step costing millions. Just start small. Start with one piece of equipment. Yeah, start with one piece of equipment. Start with one insight that you're looking for, and then if you involve the people on there, I think the results will naturally come. And be a bit brave. Yeah.
Okay, that's fantastic advice. Simon, over to you. What are your thoughts? You're on mute, Simon.
Apologies for that. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think so. I think my biggest point is you're not alone. So there's lots of help out there. It's the networking thing. There are ways to find it. You're not alone. My big shout out though really is the big political point that productivity saves jobs, and it's certainly in the industry I was in, uber competitive nationally and internationally, and it's absolutely essential that the sector drives productivity, because that is the only way to save jobs, and I think that message does get missed in the clutter. But if you don't drive productivity, where's the future? That would be my closing point.
Yeah, it's a great point, isn't it? I mean, we all know the situation we're in. UK PLC on a competitive global stage. There's challenges, of course, and there's opportunities. And in fact, the last year we've seen companies pivot in terms of products to different markets maybe they didn't serve before. We've seen ups and downs in supply, so there's a rebalancing of things like supply chain. So actually that kind of flexibility to be able to respond and kind of drive that productivity and competitiveness is quite key. Okay. Mike, just bringing you in last as well, Mike, do you want to leave us any of your parting thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a very interesting discussion, and I've certainly enjoyed listening to all the views of the panel. And from my perspective, I think we currently have the best opportunity to apply these kind of technologies and to improve our productivity. The technologies are available, the solutions exist, so it's not about having to invent new ideas. The advice and the support is available. It's companies that wish to do it and don't know how. There are people that can help them do it. So please reach out and ask the questions. And I think the other important point is that there is finance available. Jason mentioned it, that he's getting grants for different things, but there are also, the Chancellor gave us a bit of a break in the budget. So there's tax benefits as well now for offsetting capital purchases. So I think we've got the best conditions we've probably ever had in terms of helping companies adopt automation and digital technologies. And I'm very much on the same page as Simon, is we need to improve our productivity. We want our manufacturing to be competitive. We want it to grow, and we want to help all the businesses that want to do that. And I think we've got a great future. We just kind of really just got to go for it.
No, that's great parting words. Now, you might notice that Jason has dropped off the call. He had an urgent or a significant client meeting. So apologies from Jason, but I'm sure he would echo some of those things. There's help out there. Jason's a good example of an SME tapping into that help and that kind of network, that kind of start small, that drive to productivity, really locked into a business case to start off with, but really using that to kind of drive adoption. I think there's a cultural change happening in Jason's industry that he spoke to as well. So I just want to sort of finish with thanking everybody for joining the session. I want to thank the panelists as well. Some great insight, observations, but also recommendations as well, which is what this session is really about, remediating, against those barriers and challenges. So with that, I'm going to hand back to Aaron, but thank you all. Have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, Barry. That was an extremely interesting conversation. The polls were very revealing. Thank you to Barry, Mike, and all our panelists. We now have a comfort break, but please do join us back here at 10:45, where we'll be hearing from Steve Smith, Chief Engineer, Business Transformation at the MTC, and another panel of speakers. If you've missed day one of the Industrial Transformation Conference on Monday, stay tuned during the break for a review of the workshops. See you back here at 10:45.
Good afternoon, I'm Chris Tunkley, Director of Impacts and Insights here at the MTC, and welcome to this Challenge Workshop review session. Now, a core purpose of the Industrial Transformation Conference has been to confront head-on some of the most pressing manufacturing challenges facing us, and to engage with potential partners across industry, academia, and our Catapult family. And over the last few hours, 3 facilitated workshops have been running focused on different sectors: construction, space, and agri-food. And I've asked contributors from each of those sessions to provide us a snapshot from those discussions. So, hot-footing it from those workshops are Keith Waller, Chief Executive of the Construction Innovation Hub, Lucy Edge, Chief Operating Officer from the Satellite Applications Catapult, and Matt Raymond, Sector Lead on Agri-Food from the Manufacturing Technology Centre. So first off, if I can ask you, Keith, to describe the challenges that you discussed and some of the key points arising.
Thank you, Chris. So we started off thinking about why this challenge was particularly important to the construction sector. And of course, despite employing around 3 million people in the UK and representing around 8% of GDP for our overall economy, there are still a number of long-standing challenges in the sector. Things around productivity, the amount of waste we generate as a sector, how much carbon we burn both in construction and in the operation of the buildings when they're constructed. We still are underinvesting in R&D. We're not always at the forefront of innovation, and we haven't got a particularly diverse workforce that represents the society that we serve. So there's a really important for us to start as a sector understanding how industrial transformation can help move this major part of our economy forward. And we talked about the budget that happened just a couple of weeks ago, where the Chancellor set out his Build Back Better plan. And within that, he had 3 pillars of investment set out to drive an economic recovery post-COVID. And those 3 pillars are around skills, innovation, and infrastructure. And of course, whilst infrastructure might be quite central to the construction sector, the skills and innovation are particularly good opportunities for the sector to try and drive a bit of industrial transformation. So it's able to support some of those broader strategic objectives we have as a nation and as a society. How do we deliver greater social impact? How do we support a faster path to net zero? How can we make our industry more diverse and inclusive so we are able to attract the best talent into the future? So there was a lot of strong agreement in our workshop sessions. We heard from Mark Farmer as our keynote earlier in the session, where he, as the author of Modernise or Die, and he almost reframed it as Modernise and Die for a number of reasons in there, but there's some real challenges and opportunities for the sector. But there was strong agreement that just trying to do the same thing a bit better isn't good enough. We really need to be doing a better thing. We need to drive a completely different and transformative approach to how we deliver and how we value the construction sector. It shouldn't just be about how cheap can we buy construction projects. It should be how can we deliver better whole life performance for the owners of the assets, for the users of the asset, for society, in a way that supports those broader policy objectives. There was certainly a strong agreement that, as a strong consensus for change from both government and private sector investors, as well as the industry itself. And perhaps one of the things that came out in the discussion is actually, it may not be the people who currently work in the sector, those businesses, those household names, those big contractors, those big house builders we all know, not necessarily know and love, but we all know that are perhaps part of that future in the same way they are now. There could be a role for disruptors coming in. We talked about how data and digital tools will be increasingly part of how we deliver and what we deliver in the future. We talked about manufacturing processes and new manufactured products being much more prevalent than the traditional on-site build. So there's probably a role for for disruptors to come in and help support that change from outside, rather than seeing all that disruption happening from within with the current market players. But we're very fortunate if we start looking forward in the next steps. We have a strong policy environment, a strong central government policy environment that's talking about driving modern methods of construction, talking about whole life value rather than just cheap construction. So the drivers are coming from government. The drivers are equally coming from private sector investors who are looking at their ESGs and saying, how do I actually get more sustainable investment from my finance? How do I drive and support better social, better net zero type outcomes? And of course, we're seeing strong leadership from industry who have come together like no time in my career and part of the COVID response to try and collaborate, get sites back working safely, start thinking about how we move from restart to reset and to reinvent the industry. So a big collaborative spirit within the industry and between government and industry. And of course, I'm fortunate to lead the Construction Innovation Hub, which is actually funded through the industrial strategy. So this is the first time that we've had a strong policy mandate from government for transformation. It's the first time we've seen industry come together to try and recognise and address these challenges collectively and strategically rather than individually and tactically. And of course, it's the first time we've ever had any funding from government to try and drive a transformation programme. So the combination of those three things, I think, are going to be really important in supporting those next steps, Chris. But with a word of warning, we may not be in control of it. If someone comes in recognising the value of data and digital, someone like a Google, someone like an Amazon, we're not going to be able to get in their way. So I think there needs to be some agility in the industry to be able to respond to the challenges, but I'm quite optimistic we're on the right path. So thank you.
Thanks so much, Keith. Certainly sounds like a wide-ranging discussion. And as you say, it reflects the keynotes from Mark Farmer earlier and Lord Mayor. So if we can turn to you, Lucy, we have so far heard today also from Graham Turnock, Chief Exec of the UK Space Agency, and within the space stream, Lucio Caporici, Vice President of OneWeb. But you were looking at the challenge of scaling up manufacturing for the space sector. Be really interested to hear your feedback from those, Lucy.
Thanks, Chris. Yes, I was lucky enough to see the presentation from Lucio, but I missed Graham's, unfortunately, but we work very closely with the UK Space Agency from the Satellite Applications Catapult. We had I think what you'd call a small but perfectly formed group in our two workshops, and we were looking very much, I would say, through the lens of the constellation world. So thinking about these mega constellations of satellites, largely for low Earth orbit, and that was partly driven by the keynote, which came from OneWeb, of course. And we talked about why the challenge was really important, and it was related to the quantity of spacecraft that are required for a mega constellation, but also more broadly because the space industry is becoming more understood to be part of a bigger infrastructure system than it used to be. It's, you know, it's not just a side piece on its own these days. It is part of a terrestrial space combined unit so often. But also we talked about the challenge being important because this response time for a space mission is expected to be so much shorter now than it was in the past. There was nothing wrong with spending 10 years designing a perfect mission, building it, launching it, you know, spending 6 months testing it in orbit, and then, you know, finally getting into a live world of using the product. That's not okay anymore. Nobody wants that anymore. They want that much faster approach. So with that in mind, we were looking at two really strong themes came through in all of the discussions, however the questions were asked. Production line came through as a key point, and supply chain came through as a really key point. And from the production line side of things, we were looking at where we move away from testing for quality in the space manufacturing industry and perhaps move towards simulations or not testing at all, working with different tolerance levels. So there was a little bit of discussion around that, and certainly much more to think about in there. And also the duration of that end-to-end production. So going from the requirements through to the readiness to launch, having to squeeze that right down. And what does that mean for robotics, perhaps additive manufacturing processes that can be used in very specific areas to reduce times. And so there was a lot of consideration of how we can really make that production line much tighter. And one of the things that didn't come through in that was flexibility, because if you're talking about batch producing, then you're taking away that need. And, you know, unique one-off build has so often been the core of space missions. That's a big mindset change on the space sector side, but of course not on the manufacturing side. So there's a nice move into learning from existing technologies there. And on the supply chain, the overwhelming message was collaboration. You know, if you want to build well for space, you can lean on industries that have already solved production line supply chain problems, and we can borrow from that, learn from that, so that we can build for space without having to learn all the rules from scratch again ourselves. You know, there are plenty of big industries who have demonstrated really high quality success there. And while the space environment is different, it's not so different that the rules aren't applicable. So I think in terms of surprises, I've already mentioned the flexibility of design didn't rate highly, and that was a surprise for us, I think. The other surprise was, although funding was mentioned at the beginning, it kind of dropped off the table of discussion points quite early on in our conversations, which again, I think is interesting. The space industry is moving towards a much more commercial funding model now. And that doesn't mean to say government won't have a role, but the balance has moved since you know, my early days in the industry. So we didn't get to exactly what next steps are, but I know for certain that the team's already started looking at where we dig in deeper, especially into these production line and supply chain questions, and what do they really mean for the industry, and how the sectors can work together to make something really powerful for the supply chain in the UK.
Okay, but similar to construction, agility was absolutely key for your sector. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay, thanks very much. And Matt, you tackle supply chains in the agri-food sector and how technology can help us. Can you tell us more?
Yeah, sure. So we had a very interesting start to our section, because we were lucky to have a keynote from Anthony Yousefian, who's the CEO of BX. And unlike many industries, we were really lucky to have someone who is leading digital in a very different way within the agri-tech sector. And often tend to find conferences like these tend to talk about, you know, we wish it could be done, but it was great to have someone who was actually doing it. And in many ways, they had reversed the agri-tech business into the digital business, which I think is fascinating, because I can't think of another example of that. Normally, you find that the digital business is subsumed under the main business, but not the other way around. So it was very exciting to have his keynote, and then to quiz him on some of the the thoughts and opinions he has, especially around things like carbon capture. I think if we're going to have a bigger space program, we need to be capturing some of that carbon. And then with the with the second let's say keynote or introduction, we had Mike from a supply chain consultancy point of view, and it was also useful for us to have him as almost a, you know, like a line in the sand as to what it is the supply chain can currently do versus what is it they're actually doing. And I very much enjoyed his feedback on, you know, what he thought the quality of the talent and skills within that sector was, and also some of the challenges they've had over the 2020s around things such as CO2 calculation, final mile delivery, and disruptive models, you know, from business to business to direct to customer, which I think is fascinating. I think that's a very interesting idea of actually making supply chains become more divergent. But we also try to tackle some of the basic challenges of divergent supply chains, which is how do you get paid? And it's clear that the finance industry is struggling to keep up with suddenly having tens of thousands of customers rather than maybe just hundreds of customers. And I think that's super relevant to the construction team as well, where, you know, like us, you are dominated by SME style businesses who want to get direct to the end consumer. I think we had a great discussion around our second workshop, where we were trying to hone in on some of the research, or let's say the impediments that were felt as something that we as a group should be looking into. And this is where I'm very appreciative of the digital satellite catapult and the agri-tech catapults who joined us as well, which was great. So we managed to get a really good end-to-end feel of what it is like looking at a global issue right the way down to a regional, local issue as well, which was fantastic. As you'd imagine, we tried to break a lot of that down into what we were trying to call consultancy, development, and research. And we wanted to be sure that by using people like Anthony's and Mike's experience, we could understand, well, what is just pure consultancy? So what can you already get versus what needs to be developed? I think was a point from Keith earlier, you know, the technology's out there. What can we just transfer directly into our industry? And then what needs to be researched? And of course, our focus is looking at what the research is. But in the same way, technology transfer is still a huge value add for centres like ours. Finally, I think our last few questions on our second part of our workshop really struck the nail on the head, where Anthony shared with us that his top 3 issues really were around calculating what the return on investment is, where the talent and skills need to be, but more importantly, the value proposition. As Lucy mentioned, you know, there is an issue around, you know, funding and finance. Keith said the same, but also we don't often focus enough on what the value proposition is. And I think trying to get that out for digital tools can be quite a challenge, but we're very pleased that both Anthony and Ben were able to really elucidate that there is a value proposition to be had in that space. And I think that's something we probably all need to work on, because I think, like Keith's point, you know, we don't want someone coming in, you know, either under the radar or clearly above. But I think from our point of view, we know that people like Amazon are knocking on the door of the food service, you know, the food industry. So we need to understand where they add benefit, what their value proposition is. So I think it was a very interesting group, and I'm very much looking forward to listening to the others on the recording as well. And I'd encourage those who attended the other workshops to join and listen into the agri-tech one, because I think you'll find that we have a very similar set of challenges, just a different industry.
Indeed. So we are running short of time, and just before I hand back to Daisy, can each of you describe in one sentence, and I know it's tough for some of us to do that, your takeaway from your workshop? Keith, do you want to go first? One sentence.
We won't achieve anything if we're trying to work singly. We have to collaborate because the challenge is so great.
Okay, I heard collaboration. Lucy?
Don't be held back by our historical challenges in space.
Okay, and Matt?
We have to consider the value proposition. If we can't have that clearly elucidated, our customers won't understand.
Great. So as Matt suggested, if you're interested to know more about these sessions, recordings will be available in due course on the MTC YouTube channel. And if you'd like to be an active participant in addressing particular challenges, there will be a link to the sign-up sheet on the chat. We do intend to run the further workshops on each of these so that we'll be forming small working groups. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone who contributed to the workshops, to the facilitators,
Hello and welcome back. Next up, we're going to hear from an expert panel drawn from industry, academia, and across the UK's Catapult family on how we'll build resilience into our supply chains. Leading this session is Steve Smith, Chief Engineer, Business Transformation at the MTC. Steve, over to you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. Hope everyone is enjoying the conference so far. Welcome to the panel discussion of the topic of supply chain resilience. We're going to be talking about supply chain resilience, answering your questions, and hopefully demystifying what resilience in supply chains is. I'll introduce myself first. I'm Steve Smith, Chief Engineer for the Transformation Team at the MTC. I've worked here for the past 5 years. Really pleased to have been asked to moderate this session. I've got a real passion about supply chains, their importance in any large transformational programme. Now, after hearing how inspirational the speakers have been up until now, I hope I won't disappoint you. We're just going to start off by introducing a very experienced, exciting group of panelists. I'm going to give a brief opening statement for each one, and then we'll pass it over to them so they can give their area of expertise and feelings around supply chain resilience. So we've got Jonathan Timmis. John has worked in the rail industry for 18 years, both in the public and private sector, and has worked in many roles, including procurement, operational delivery, strategic transformation, all with a focus on delivering value for money for the business. His latest achievements include developing and implementing £300 million outsourced contract with TVS and the development of the manufacturing supply chain work stream in conjunction with the MTC. John will be able to talk about some of his experience of his journey in building resilience into network rail supply chain. We're also joined by Michael Ward. Professor Michael Ward has a dual role at the University of Strathclyde as both Chief Technology Officer for the Advanced Nuclear Research Centre and Director of Industrial Strategy for the university. As the Director of Industrial Strategy, Michael works with the central team, colleagues across the university, industry and other key stakeholders to help build a Strathclyde approach to industrial strategy. Michael joined Strathclyde in 2013 and was Technical Director of the Advanced Forming Research Centre, one of the 7 centres of the High Value Manufacturing Catapult, until early 2020. Prior to joining Strathclyde, he many years at Rolls-Royce, where he undertook a number of roles related to manufacturing technology and its implementation. In his last few years at Rolls-Royce, Michael was Chief Capability Acquisition, a global role in which he developed the company's methodology for manufacturing research translation and oversaw the global manufacturing and technology programme. We're also joined by Professor Paul Maropoulos. Paul is the Director of the Advanced Manufacturing Innovation Centre in Northern Ireland and the Professor of Advanced Manufacturing at Queen's Belfast University. He's a Director of Technology and Strategy Consulting Limited and is an Honorary Fellow of the Manufacturing Technology Centre in recognition of his contribution to manufacturing industry in the UK. He's a Chartered Engineer, a Fellow of the Institute of Mechanical Engineers and a Board Member and past Chair of the Manufacturing Industries Division of the IMechE and the current Editor-in-Chief of the Journal of Engineering Manufacture. Professor Maropoulos has led major initiatives in advanced technology development and capability enhancement, working with blue chip companies including Rolls-Royce, Airbus, Caterpillar, Nissan and Renishaw, as well as many SMEs. His expertise includes digital manufacturing, machining and assembly, design verification, measurement-enabled manufacturing, and supply chain readiness. He's also directed strategic regional initiatives to enhance business productivity and manufacturing competitiveness in industrial sectors in the Northeast, Southwest, the Midlands, and Northern Ireland. And we've also got Sai Kyon. Sai started as a fair with supply chain resilience back in 2008 when designing and delivering development supply chain programs for major firms in the Middle East whilst working as a visiting lecturer for an international college in Abu Dhabi. Before joining the MTC 4 years ago, Sai worked for PERA and the West Midlands Manufacturing Consortium. He's an accredited master coach and IEE mentor. He's worked independently as a process efficiency engineer and project manager and has over 30 years industrial experience, including owning and managing a tier 2 aero automotive engineering manufacturer for 6 years. So has written and delivered 100 bespoke training programs in Europe and the Middle East in the oil and gas, chemical, telecommunications and banking sectors, as well as teaching interrogation techniques in the Abu Dhabi police. A biochemist by profession, he's an MBA from Manchester Business School. He has published work on entrepreneurship in a Journal of Innovation and Technology. And Sai has taken a lead role in the development and application of MTC Supply Chain Readiness Assessment tool. I think that's an absolutely fantastic panel. Callum, would it be possible to bring up the instructions on joining VBox, sorry. Thank you very much. So this is a very important part for this session, joining VBox. Log instructions are on the screen. If you could download it and load it on your computer, use the ID 170-947-562. This will allow you to be involved in the polls where we'll be asking your opinion. You'll be able to ask questions and upvote on which questions you want to hear from. So I think you've probably heard enough from me now. So what I'm going to do is hand you over now to the panelists we've got, and they will give you a short 2 to 3 minute introduction into the topic of supply chain resilience and their particular interest area. So I'll pass you first to Professor Paul Moropoulos. Paul?
Oh, sorry. Hi to everybody, and thank you very much, Steve. I think you have done a very thorough introduction of what I have done. So hopefully everybody will be aware of where I'm coming from. My interest started academically 6 years ago, looking at how can we industrialize innovation coming from universities, catapult centers in a faster way, better way. We're spending billions into innovation R&D. We're having some of the most innovative companies in the world. However, industrialization has not always been as easy. So therefore, getting innovation to stick, getting innovation to physically get value for money into the UK PLC is what really drove me into looking into this. And when I started looking into this, there was a multiplicity of parameters that physically play into making a company more able to industrialize innovation than others. So it's a combined capability that this really has to be understood in a very thorough way. The theoretical study was done by Aston University, and we published that paper. And then I started working with the MTC 2.5 years ago, really trying to make this methodology of supply chain readiness, as we called it, to become much more focused on industrial application. And I think the journey has been amazing. And at the moment, we have a really good understanding of readiness for the supply chain. And readiness, if I can give you a very quick starter for 10, is the capability to rapidly and cost-effectively industrialize innovation and operate at world-class standards. This is, for me, is the definition of readiness. As we're doing the work with readiness, resilience and the COVID pandemic hit us. And it was really, really interesting to really say, how can we now adjust what we have in order to be able to provide a measure of resilience? And I think I will start by saying what is resilience for me is the ability of a business or a supply chain to recover quickly from major and frequent disruptions in the market environment. And both resilience and readiness are effectively tied in the hip. They're very, very closely connected, and they're combined capabilities. So hopefully we'll have opportunities to analyze that further, but just give you another indication coming from external sources. McKinsey reported recently that shocks that affect global production are growing more frequent and more severe, and that disruptions lasting a month or longer now occur every 3.7 years on average. That means that we really have to, irrespective of pandemic, of COVID, we've got to get better in our readiness capability. So I think that's enough for now, and hopefully I'll participate later on in answering questions. Thank you, Steve.
Very much, Paul. It's really interesting fact actually about the increasing problems with the global supply chain, because there's been a lot of focus this past year due to COVID-19, but you're right, we can't switch off thinking about it. It's something that's not going to go away. I'd like to pass over to Professor Michael Ward, if that's all right with you, Michael.
Yes, thanks, Steve. Hi, everybody. So, well, my interest in supply chains really stems from the fact that I guess for nearly all of my career, I've been involved in translation of research and innovation. And what I found during my industrial career, which was mainly in Rolls-Royce when I was trying to do this, is that you know, as we get technologies ready for exploitation, probably as big a factor as anything is whether or not we've got the right supply chain set up in place. The technology can work very nicely and be you know, a good thing and an interesting thing, and can support interesting and important new products. But unless the supply chain considerations are made properly, then everything that we do around innovation isn't so effective. And it absolutely ties into this readiness question that Paul was trying to deal with as he made his introduction. As we look at things today, it almost feels a little bit like the boots on the other foot. If we look at the world in response to what COVID has taught us, you know, we've seen the effect of a massive disruption, hopefully a disruption that we aren't going to see so often in future. But we see the effect of things like the fact that in certain types of supply chains, the demands for certain types of products have gone away. So you've got stock and inventory and all that sort of thing in the wrong place, or things that are never going to be needed in the future. And it drives you down the route to say, you know, is there a, you know, to what extent do we need to innovate around this idea of what a supply chain is, how a supply chain works, and you know, maybe change that interaction between innovation and supply chain design to respond to what's going to be needed in future. And you know, this idea of resilience for me is you know, can you have freedom to act? Can you actually do what you want to do based on whatever circumstances are presented with you, whether that be as a result of a big negative effect like a global pandemic, or whether it's change or a disruptive business model, is equally a disturbance to a market, and we equally need to think of resilience in that context as well.
Yeah, thank you very much, Michael. So I think the importance of supply chain, particularly around technology adoption and innovation, is really critical, and I think it's usually one that sadly that's overlooked. You know, there's a lot of talk around the TRL, the technology readiness level, but less time actually making sure supply chains are ready for that technology. I'd like to pass on now to John, if you'd like to give us a bit about your experience maybe at Network Rail.
Yeah, sure. Good morning, all. Really interesting, actually, just picking up on what Paul and Michael were just saying, really, in terms of the dynamic changes that occur within the supply chain. Because obviously, from my perspective, we're at the delivery end of that. And being in Network Rail, you know, we don't manufacture goods. We're reliant on our suppliers to manufacture those goods. And I think the situation that's occurred in the last 12 months has really tested the resilience of our supply chain, because a lot of the suppliers that we deal with are predominantly rail-based suppliers. And what's been evident from the work that we've been doing in conjunction with the ITC is how reliant they are on Network Rail. And as part of the development that we've been working on in terms of improving their resilience, we've been looking to how we can improve their capability in diversifying to other market sectors. Because ultimately, you know, we need those suppliers. You know, we need those suppliers to keep our railways running. And without that, you know, people won't be able to get from A to B and, you know, to where they need to get to in terms of the workplace. And as I say, really sort of picking up on the sort of pandemic and the issues that have occurred in terms of world shortages, we feel that very much so at the heart of when we're asking our suppliers to deliver materials. And, you know, we have to take a vested interest in our suppliers, which is all part and parcel of the program that we've embarked, as you rightly said in the introduction. So, you know, we're very much on that journey. And as I say, I think the work that we've done in relation to resilience and our supply chain capability is really starting to highlight areas where we need to focus in terms of making sure that we don't end up in a situation where, you know, we end up with not being able to supply materials. So, you know, I say I'm really looking forward to answering people's questions and, you know, seeing what their thoughts are in relation to this topic. But from my perspective and the journey that we're on, we're very much, you know, at the very early stages of this process, because, you know, it's a different way of thinking. You know, you opened up, Steve, in my bio about, you know, taking cost out. Well, actually taking cost out is absolutely part and parcel of doing a good job. But at the end of the day, you still need a resilient and a sort of reliable supply chain there to be able to do that. So, you know, it's a different message. And I think this is the thing that we're very much being educated on. And I think this is definitely something that our suppliers are starting to realize, that, you know, we need them as much as you know, they need us. And we've got to make sure that we work together collaboratively to mitigate these situations.
Brilliant, thank you for that. It's really insightful, actually, because I do feel there is a need to change away from the traditional cost down supply chain models, focusing, you know, on the short-term gains. And I think you've summed that up perfectly. So thank you. Si, would you like to give us a short piece?
Yeah, sure. Steve mentioned in his short bio about myself, I've been associated with supply chain since 2008, and I just want to remind people that despite what's happened in the last 12 months and the impact that it's had on industry and virtually all aspects of commercial life, these things do happen from a fairly regular basis, and 2008 was an example. We had a major financial crisis. I was working in fairly big firms in the Middle East, and what was apparent to me is that a lot of them had got operational elements within their business to try and shore up against unexpected events. Simple things like, you know, dual sourcing or carrying additional machinery, so that if something breaks down, it doesn't interrupt supply. That to me is more robustness than resilience, because it's doing the operational things that you can do based on risks that you might identify in the market because they're visible. What resilience is about is being ready for the unexpected events that you can't see. And that's more, to me, of a strategic intent. It's about having teams, people in place and resources that can quickly switch to dealing with any particular situation. That, you know, it's about agility, digital skills within a business. The last couple of years have been spent developing this supply chain readiness tool, the MTC's tool, which is a high-level tool. And it became apparent after we've been developing this for some time, largely through the work with Paul, that there are certain characteristics associated with resilience. And we've been able to measure those characteristics. And I have to say, initially, after doing 80 assessments of this type, the results are pretty encouraging for the UK economy, in the sense that we're seeing certainly average to good levels of resilience within the UK economy, and in some cases, some very high levels of resilience. There's a sort of national, a built-in ability to very quickly adapt themselves to new situations. And I think that's one of the things that the tool has enabled us to look at and actually give people a reference point from which they can work from.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Si. I certainly think the experience and results of that, what was it, 80, did you say, 80 assessments? You know, at least it is showing a very positive picture for the UK supply chain now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. Callum, is it possible that you could open up the first poll for us? Brilliant. So what I'm asking now, you've only got a short time, so be quick, people. But if you could vote on the top 3 concerns you have with your supply chain, as it currently is. This will give us a good idea, really, of phasing how we can sort of start talking about some of the concerns that that are out there. So you know, please please vote, and we'll start discussing some of them as the results start coming in. And it's always quite interesting, kind of seeing people's opinion on their own challenges. I'm sure it's different between sectors, but I'm sure there's probably an overall trend there. So it looks like results are still coming in. So people, you've still got a little bit of time. I think it's probably at the moment you can see there's clearly two outlier leaders. One, I don't know how resilient my critical suppliers are, and I don't know if my suppliers can grow and develop, support my future strategy. So I think there's some quite interesting results there. Putting it to the panel. Paul, is anything surprising about those results from your point of view?
I think these results are correlating very well because, as you said, Steve, the two big runners here, I do not know how resilient the critical suppliers are, and also how can we have future strategy to develop that. They're all interconnected. You're absolutely right. If we look at resilience threats, I think Sai started articulating, there are 6 underpinning capabilities that we physically cluster as contributing towards resilience. And if I can mention very, very quickly, because it includes aspects of effectively what the poll indicated, is strategy is one key capability, supplier intimacy or understanding of the supplier, sustainability, agility, digital, and standards. And as you see, the strategy is a thread that's effectively coming up again. Understanding your supplier as well, and the supply chain end to end, understanding what the critical points are in the supply chain are vital. So therefore, exactly the bottom question that seemed to making the big run in the poll. I do not know if my suppliers can grow. That, unless you have the intimacy and unless you have the understanding of the market intelligence and how the strategy and all the pressure points can actually have the ripple effect across the supply chain, you cannot really answer that question. But to me, it's not a surprise that the resilience and that is linked nicely.
Yeah, thank you for that, Paul. John, interesting question for you, I suppose. Do these sort of concerns match the ones that you've had with your supply chain?
Absolutely. It resonates wholeheartedly, and I'm sort of not surprised at all to see that one being the front runner. When we embarked on our program 2.5 years ago, one of the key aspects of that program was about alignment of objectives downstream to our supply chain. And it was pretty evident that our suppliers didn't really understand, what the direction of the business that we were going into. So how can they, make sure that they put the right controls in place, have the right investment, sort of processes in place. And it was one of the key objectives was about alignment of objectives and actually passing that through the supply chain to enable them to be able to deliver a resilient supply chain. And it's been evident from the work that we've done with the MTC, with the assessment tool, that, when we did the measure of, do you understand our objectives and how that relates to your business, there was quite a number of gaps. And obviously part of that now is addressing those gaps and making sure that those companies and those suppliers understand how they can make better business decisions around, say, plant resources, future strategy, to be able to be a more resilient and sustainable supplier.
Fantastic. I think the interesting thing you've just brought up there as well is, the people voting have said that they don't know if the suppliers can grow and develop, support the future strategy. And you've just kind of confirmed that actually the supply chain doesn't really fully understand what the prime strategy is. So at the same time, there's a challenge of fear from the prime's point of view and an unknown strategy to focus on from the point of view of suppliers.
Absolutely. I think the only other thing I would say is it's no different to having a team or leading a team. If you don't set good objectives, you're not going to get the best out of them.
Yeah. Michael, have you got any thoughts on the results coming in?
Well, I think it's interesting. I think Paul's point about intimacy is an interesting one. I think, these two things, how do you know whether your suppliers can grow? How do you know whether they're resilient or not? You're going to know that if you know your suppliers really well, and maybe these answers identify the fact that maybe some of the people and organisations involved aren't as close to their suppliers as really they would need to be to really deal with this question of resilience. I think it's pretty hard to do, because you're probably trying to probe into areas where you're outside of some of the day-to-day considerations that you have with them, and there probably isn't a way of clicking your fingers and getting that level of intimacy. I don't suppose, but it's a long game, I guess, is what it seems to me, and with a view to being a little bit more trusting and doing all those things that are around cooperation. And I do agree with the point that it's quite similar to working with a team of people and trying to lead a team of people. You've got to establish that trust. It's going to be a two-way process, and that's got to build up over a period of time, and that's where that intimacy comes from. And that I would speculate is maybe why those two high scores come out.
Brilliant, thanks for that, Michael. Michael, are you surprised at the fact that digital connectivity within my supply chain was lower?
Well, not really, because I'm a big enthusiast for digital technology, but I think I'm not an enthusiast for technology's sake. The big challenge of supply chain is getting your act together and being organised, it seems to me, and digital technology can help with that. But it doesn't actually, and it helps, but it doesn't do the job for you. You've got to get your act together, and you've got to use digital tools to help with that. If you don't, it's not, the digital technology isn't a substitute for actually being organised and putting the right things in place and getting the right understanding of how the suppliers you work with operate as organisations and as people. So I'm not 100% surprised by that score. I think if it was a slightly different question of have you adopted loads of digital technology, I think that might be a different response.
Yeah. Si, you can see the results. What are your thoughts around?
I was just going to pick up on that point there that Michael said. I mean, it's got the lowest figure there. I don't have digital connectivity. It's 20%. One thing I will say is, and it was fairly apparent when we were using the assessment tool, we've used the assessment tool in a variety of different sectors, and what's become apparent is that there are clusters of companies forming, and they have different resilience characteristics, but equally across the board, no matter which company you look at, there are certain things that come out every time. And one of the questions that's in our assessment is, are you ready for the digital revolution? And that's probably one of the lowest scored responses we ever get. And therefore, the reason that's not a surprise to me is because the level of understanding within the industry in general, and the supply chains in particular, about just what the digital revolution can do to revolutionize the supply chain network is not yet fully understood. So that to me is one of the reasons why that might be such a low figure.
Brilliant, fantastic. But before we move on, sorry.
I'm just going to sort of build on what Si was saying, really, and I think it's a really valid point, because if you go back to the sort of setting of objectives piece that I was talking about earlier, if you'd have asked me 2.5 years ago, do you understand what I 4.0 means? I'd have said, I've no idea. Because how can we inform our businesses about what that means in relation to big data and additive manufacturing, all that sort of stuff? If we're not driving that agenda, is it being important? Then our suppliers not going to be seeing that as important either. And it was evident from when we did the assessment with the suppliers that we selected, 90+% of those organizations weren't even familiar with the digital revolution. So, it really just goes to show that, who's leading the conversation. And what we want to be leading that conversation to take our supply chain to the next stage of where it needs to be, and getting away from the 80s, because there's a lot of change that's happened in the last 30, 40 years. So yeah, just really sort of echoing what Si was saying, really, in terms of real life examples.
Yeah, if I could add a point to that, just to support what John was saying there. When we were doing the particular work within Network Rail, one of the things that became apparent to us is there's a huge opportunity to release value from the supply chain. And where that value can be released is probably unexpected to us, in the sense that it's in the interface between the suppliers and their customers. In other words, the process of dealing with suppliers is pretty archaic. And as a consequence, it's hugely costly. And the digital technologies that are available today that enable suppliers to better connect with their supply chains, so that we can do electronic transactions and remove all the manual element of that, offers a massive opportunity to dramatically improve the efficiency and effectiveness of those supply chains. And it releases value to the benefit both of the customer and the supplier as well. And if you can release that value, that money can be used to invest in better technology. So it's a virtuous circle.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. Callum, is it possible to open if any questions have come through? And wow, yeah. So this is your chance. While questions come through, you can vote on the ones that you like on the VVox app, and we'll take the ones from the top. Once we've answered them, they'll disappear. So the highest one at the moment is responsiveness, similar to agility. So, Si, do you want to take that one?
Yeah, what I'd say on that is that there's a lot of elements of agility. I was doing an assessment just earlier today, and I was asked precisely this question: what makes an agile response? Because the company thought they were agile, and actually, having done the assessment, they got quite a low agile score. And it's because they are highly reactive, and they interpret that as being agility. And actually, agility has got different elements. It's about whether the infrastructure of the business can be rapidly reconfigured, whether they can repurpose their assets easily. Have they got skills that they could turn to other areas easily? Have they got an innate knowledge of the area in which they're operating, so they could stand back and say, where else can we use that? So that it's not just responsiveness. There's more elements to it.
Fantastic.
Yeah, if I can add this, Chair, it's fundamentally agility is that if you are agile, you do not need to be responsive. This is how I would like to put it. If you are agile, you really know the landscape, you know what's coming around the corner. It's like a fantastic footballer. He doesn't run around the football pitch pointless from A to B, because he knows where the ball will be played next time around. So this is really the responsiveness and agility. It's a fundamental thing. And as Si said, agility is really a systematic, strategic capability, where responsiveness, anybody can be responsive, say, oh, I've got a crisis first thing in the morning. So the more agile we are, the less need to respond we will have in a way.
Fantastic. I think we've probably covered that question, and I'm quite keen to get to the next one down, which is a question for John. So with regard to communication of your business strategy, how do you facilitate communication of the Network Rail strategy to your suppliers? That's a tough old question, isn't it, John?
It is a good, but it's a very valid question. I think, you know, for those that don't know about how we operate on a 5-year business plan. So every 5 years, we have what we call a strategic business plan, which we basically draft and then communicate via Network Rail's website. But obviously, in terms of how that then gets delivered in practical terms, you've got to then think about, you know, what are we asking our suppliers to provide us with? So you've got things like, obviously, trains. Obviously, we move a lot of stuff around the network in terms of materials. We, you know, do enhancements to the railway, which obviously is delivered by our suppliers. So what you then end up getting into is a local strategy for that particular area. So what I'm currently responsible for is the electrification and plant team within Network Rail's central supply chain. So I'm actually currently engaging in a information notice, which is around our steelwork strategy for the next 8 years. So there's actually what we call a PIN, private information notice, which is out there at the moment, which is asking the market a load of questions about what do you think you can bring to the table in relation to that particular procurement strategy. And this is where, as an organization, there's the fundamentals that we need to deliver as a business, which is about, PPM, getting trains on time, delivering safe network, cost value for money, all those sort of strategic stuff. But it's in the power of people like myself and other parts of our business leaders to make sure that that gets translated into what it means for our suppliers. So it's our responsibility to really translate that into something which is workable and meaningful for our supply chain. And as I said, that's what we're currently actively engaging with on a steelwork procurement, which is basically going to be a national steelwork contract for Network Rail. So again, that's the opportunity, and then obviously local conversations that we have with our suppliers about that particular piece of work, because it will affect the next 8 years of supply. So it's, as I said, the onus is on the individuals, that we take it from top down and then live and breathe it as part of our day-to-day running of our teams.
Brilliant, fantastic, thanks for that. We've got another one that's sort of shooting to the top, which I think's a really good point, actually. It says the biggest concern is not listed. You say, well, I didn't list all the concerns because I wanted you to put some questions in. Lack of skills, echoing Michael's point. Obsessing about digitisation is not a route forward for any SME. What's the board's opinion on this? Michael, do you want to start with that one?
Well, I mean, not surprisingly, I've got some sympathy with that point.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you're right. I think obsessing with it is exactly the wrong thing to do. I think you've got to do what you need to do to run your business and make it successful. And if digitalization is part of that, then absolutely you've got to go down digitalization route. But actually, if you've got more important things to sort out, to become organized and to make things work properly, then do those and use digital technology where it needs to be done. I think the only caveat I would add to that is, there is always the risk, and you've got to avoid trying to be blindsided by the possibility that somebody comes up with a very disruptive, digitally enabled business model. You don't want to be hit by the fact that a kind of an Amazon type situation doesn't emerge where somebody comes along and completely swamps the market with an entirely different way of doing business that probably kills off a lot of SMEs. But apart from that caveat, I would say you do what you need to do. You use digital where it makes sense to use it, and you take a pragmatic approach to it. Is my opinion.
No, I fully agree with you. John, it'd be interesting to hear from you whether, you've got a lot of SMEs in your supply chain. What are your thoughts around digitization and this route forward for any SME?
Yeah, I think Michael's point is, again, spot on. And as an organization who will lead in procurement and asking suppliers to bid for work, it's important that we understand where their capabilities are so that we don't restrict, suppliers coming in to be able to deliver a good product and a competitive product. So things like understanding the landscape of the digital space with our SMEs is really important so that we don't effectively exclude them. So again, it all comes down to due diligence, and really sort of resonating with what Michael's saying is it's about where relevant and where applicable, and don't just create these barriers to entry for the sake of saying, well, you know what, we need this, all encompassing fantastic supply chain, which is going to cost us a lot of money, and actually you don't need it. And I think it's a balance. But we have to take that responsibility as a lead organization who's procuring goods and services, not to just exclude people and remove them from potentially supplying us with that competitive product.
Yeah, fantastic. Paul, your take on digitalization in SMEs?
I think it is fair to say that digitization has played severely over the last 5 years, really. Digital Industry 4.0 has done really, in terms of awareness, I believe most companies now have heard, and perhaps we overplayed that, because sometimes I'm worried that we have lost or we've forgotten the classic good manufacturing skills about lean and about continuous improvement, about Kaizen and so on, in the drive for digitization. Digital will not solve all the problems, I'm entirely in agreement. However, there are disruptive methods that people actually can deliver using digital techniques, So we should be aware of that. It's all about competencies, and I think the skills is about the competence. You need to decide how best the environment ahead of you somehow will require a bundle of skills within your workforce for the company to be able to thrive going forward. And digital will be one of them. Good old manufacturing engineering will be another one. Factory design will be another one. So therefore, we need to be somehow, it's a portfolio approach, and it's a matrix, as I think Sai will tell you. It's a matrix. We always have to understand what is the work requirement looking like, what is the challenge, where is the customer expecting me to be good at, and what are the pressure points, and then work backwards and say, okay, the skills needed for that is this. If I can say something from university perspective, universities and colleges, for that matter, are very good in responding to signals from the market, but sometimes we don't have a very, very clear signal as well from companies to say these are the needs. So the more companies can, I love that question, the more companies can tell us these are the real needs that we have, the more than the sectors, universities and colleges and schools for that matter, can actually rise up to the challenge and provide proper solutions to address the needs. But it's a very pertinent question. It's a really good challenge.
Excellent. Is there anything left unsaid about that question, Si, or are you happy to move to the next one? What's your thoughts?
All I'd say on it is, it does say, Paul made the point before that, the digital aspect, or the topic that we're talking about is resilience, and the digital aspect of resilience is just one of 6 areas, and it's got to be taken in proportion. And then a bit of a shout out for the UK economy. We've just done an assessment on about 40 firms in the northwest of England. And one of the things that's been apparent to me is the smaller end of those firms are the ones who get the digital idea. They get it. And there's a lot of them, I would hope to think, although they're small now, because they understand the impact that the digital revolution can have on the economy. I could see some rapid growth in that area, which will contribute to the UK economy.
And Si, just a question for me on that. Do you think that sort of then ties back into the agility piece? Because obviously they are, generally sort of privately owned businesses. They don't have the corporates to deal with. Therefore, they can be more responsive and agile to make these business decisions at that local level.
Yeah, it's kind of a mindset question. We're talking some of the mid-range companies, and their view is, okay, this revolution's upon us. We need to get ready. We need to find out what we need to do. Whereas the question that's being asked at some of the smaller companies is, this is great. How can I use this to advance my business? Which is a slightly different mindset. You see what I'm saying?
Fantastic. I think, Si, you've got the next question as well. So if you look at the next question down, it's a question for Si.
Oh, right.
In regards to intimacy, what is it that makes an OEM supply chain relationship intimate?
It's an understanding. The questions that we ask in the assessment, what they're trying to get to is, do you have an understanding of the value that your suppliers can bring? And do you understand all the elements in the transaction that's taking place? It's not just buying things. We look at 4 different levels of transaction in terms of, is it just a transaction? Are they a preferred supplier? Are they the first person you would phone up? Or are they a partner, in the sense that you wouldn't just buy things from them, but you'd phone up and ask their advice about what you should buy? And as you can see, that relationship's developing. The last level for us is alliance, where there's some kind of connection between the 2 organizations. So they are to some extent an extension of your business. So that's how I'd describe it, an increasing level of relationship and intimacy.
Yeah, fantastic. The next question we've got down is, where can we get access to the MTC supply chain readiness tool? So it's probably a good one for you as MTC, but the answer would be at the MTC. I would hazard a guess.
Absolutely, that's a good start. I've got to say, and a shout out for John and Network Rail. I mean, when we built the tool originally, we wanted a high level tool that was relatively simple to use. There's lots of good tools out there. They really are. But in many cases, they focus on specific aspects of business. And we wanted a sort of overarching view that would give us a view of resilience and capability. And it's through the work that we did with Network Rail, which was probably the first proper industrial project where we had 20 or so firms gone through it, that we were able to develop the tool to the point where we can use it now. And as I said, it's been used 80 times over. So it's demonstrated that it's got some robustness and some resilience.
Yeah, and I think from our perspective, what's been really great about that is, it's classic supply development, and it never stops, because we can see now where the areas are weakness, where the areas of strength are across those organizations. And to answer the question about intimacy, it gives us focus about the areas where we need to work with our suppliers to improve and to continually improve those business areas. And it gives us some measure, as a pulse check to see where those things are measuring on a bi-monthly basis or a quarterly basis, just to see if any disturbances in the supply chain have had an effect on their overall sort of business resilience. So, as I said, it's been a real educational piece for us at the front end of working with our suppliers. And I think one of the big benefits is not just been for Network Rail, it's been for our suppliers. They've been implementing things on the back of this because they can see the value in doing that. So, to go back to intimacy, that's when you start to go on that journey, and it never stops. It's just a constant thing that you've just got to keep spending time and understanding your supply chain.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you for that, John. The question we've got topping the list at the moment is, do you just look at the big players, or would you buy local and keep the pound local where you can help the local community? If so, how do you go about looking for local business opportunities? Michael, do you fancy having a go at answering that one?
Well, I'll have a go at it. Yes,
yeah, it's a tricky one.
It's not such an easy question. I think the buy local point is increasingly important. I think it does link quite closely with the question of resilience, because I think the more drawn out and remote supply chains are, then the more the less control you have, in a way, of what there is. So I think the whole thing of resilience, and and we've seen it. It was on the news this morning about vaccines. You're trying to buy a vaccine from a big facility in India, and the UK has got limited influencing power on something like that. So trying to do something local like that, if as an alternative, it does strengthen this position of resilience. I also think you link it to the green agenda as well. And the green agenda is going to be increasingly important, it seems to me, and possibly, I would argue, a much bigger industrial change probably than even digitalisation is. And the buy local thing seems to be around that. I think how you do it is pretty hard, because we have to all recognise that, because we haven't had this focus on buying local and having a complete UK supply chain, that means there are gaps. So it's not possible to do everything locally. And again, that's a kind of long-term game, I would say. I think it's about trying to work with the suppliers that have got certain capabilities, trying to encourage them to establish other ones. And it's probably also about working with organisations like MTC and HVM Catapult, and trying to help the growth of capability in areas that are currently gaps.
Yeah, fantastic. Paul, if you got any takes on local supply chains?
I think the first question there, Steve, is very interesting. It's really linking to what Michael was saying. Are there any positive outcomes of this experience? I think there is multiple. Firstly, it really identified how fragile things can be. And although we thought we're a very advanced society, actually we had a lot of disconnects, and all this were brought into focus. I think the UK will become a little bit more somehow aware of the risk that we have in sourcing critical components from areas that physically we do not really understand very well. And there's the geography, as you very well, Michael, articulated. It is the green agenda as well, all the CO2 to transfer parts from around the globe. All that will have to be reconsidered. And I have the feeling we're in the cusp of a major, somehow advance forward on the basis of that. I see us becoming more resilient. I see us developing gaps in technology that we had to plug them to make sure that we're a little bit more self-sufficient going forward. It's impossible to be self-sufficient in the world, but critical components and critical technologies we must be able to manage. And the other positive thing is this getting ahead of the pack in the green technologies.
Excellent. Thank you very much for that. I'm sort of looking at the question around back in COVID and Brexit causing supply issues with overseas supplies and bringing stuff back to the UK. Do you see a positive outcome, Si?
I was just going to say I've done 5 assessments this week for a client, and the brief is, we recognise we need some local supply. We might not be buying everything in the UK, but there's certainly 2-3 major projects that I'm aware of where there's a specific intention to keep supplies local.
Mm.
And by the way, the organisation we've been speaking to are relatively small companies. They are sort of SME to that sort of level. So there's certainly some opportunities out there currently if you can switch horses in midstream, as it were.
Excellent. We'll go to the next question down. So how do you know if your suppliers are resilient? What should you be looking out for? So do you want to take that one again?
Yeah, I think it's those elements that we said, when we set up we didn't intend to look at resilience, by the way. I don't think COVID sort of appeared after we'd started to do this. But there's some work done in MIT about what are the components of a resilient organisation, and that's been greatly supplemented both by Michael and Paul. And in fact, we used some of their work when we were trying to build our tool. And as Paul said before, you've got these 6 elements of resilience. And basically what we're suggesting to folks, when we do an assessment, they get a visual map of the 6 areas so that they can very quickly say, look, you're okay in these 4 areas, but you need to do something in this particular one. I've got to say that probably the one that comes up, which is kind of a surprise, and it's in some ways response to that question before about should we be chasing the digital revolution? It's not normally the digital maturity element of resilience that comes up as the weakest. That does happen occasionally, but it's not normally that. It's normally systems, standards and processes within organizations that tends to be a barrier. It's having the right systems in place so that you can take advantage of opportunities when they should arise. But there are other elements that have been mentioned: agility, sustainability, which is the operational things that you do on a day-to-day basis, just to make sure that when things go wrong, you're able to very quickly react. For 2 reasons. One is you want to stay in business, and 2 is the quicker you can plug the dike, the less money runs out.
Good point there, Si. We've probably got time maybe for one more question before we open the final poll. So if we look at the next question down, as a business, we focus on reducing costs by implementing lean in our supply chain, just-in-time delivery, reduce inventory stock holding, single source supply, and the use of low-cost economies, etc. This has led us to major problems during COVID. How can we improve our supply chain without increasing the cost? So that's a pretty tough question. I'm going to pass that to Paul because,
Thank you, Steve. I think this is really has all the elements of what we said earlier, because if you're very, very lean, of course, you don't have this buffer to protect you from when there is a tough call. If you bring everything closer to home, if you reshore, if you look at the single points of failure in your supply chain, do a supply chain map to understand where the risk may come from. It's about risk management. And sometimes the intimacy and creating partnerships, agreeing risk and reward, so that sharing risk and reward, so that you have sharing of the risk and the benefits then from that locally, if possible. These are all strategies that will help a company navigate this very, very tough one. How can I be more protected to risk, and how can I achieve that at a lower cost? And it's all a combination of all these parameters. And I think we need to look at the specific business, but overall, I think this is where I would look for. I would look for strategic partnerships with companies that are actually compatible with you, and get it to the point where the dual sourcing, the localization of supply, the intimacy that we said earlier on can play to your advantage.
Yeah, Michael, have you got any thoughts around this this problem of how you improve the supply chain without increasing the costs?
Well, I mean, it's a pretty tough question, isn't it? But I think, I mean, at the risk of slightly contradicting myself, I think there is a part to play here for digital technology in situations where the possibility exists to use digital technology to kind of drive this batch size of one idea, and flexibility, going from an order or a request from a product to making it, using a combination of digital manufacturing technologies. I think that provides a kind of longer term opportunity. It's not a quick fix, and it does require that investment, and it's not going to be open to everybody, I accept. But I mean, I think that is an example of where specific targeted use of digital technology has got quite a good opportunity.
Brilliant, thanks for that. Callum, is it possible to bring up the last poll? I'm conscious that everyone's probably really hungry for lunch, and we've only 20 minutes to go. What we'd like everybody to do really is at this point now, select your top 3. What's your focus area next 1 to 2 years within your supply chain? So this is really just looking forward now. What are you looking at doing in the next 1 to 2 years? Is it helping find a solution for single source supply, driving digital connectivity, trying to understand the wider supply chain beyond the first tier, reducing the environmental impact of supply chain around this driving zero carbon that Michael was talking about earlier, onshoring, reshoring, or looking at changing your supplier model in light of Brexit, COVID, and whatever is thrown at us next. So it'll be great to hear your thoughts. What we'll do then is we'll put it to the panel for the next sort of 5 minutes. The panel can then give their responses to your feedback, and then we'll have a little bit of closing statements, and then everyone can go for lunch. So it's the scores are still coming in, but there's a sort of 3 at the moment that sort of leading. Currently driving digital connectivity with my supply chain is sort of one that's got 100% of the people have voted, and the single source supply chain and driving zero carbon are 2 others that seem to be getting a lot of momentum. We'll give it another couple of minutes for people to vote, and then we'll put it to yourselves on the panel, and you can give us some feedback on what your thoughts around it are.
It's interesting that digital numbers jumped up so high considering what it was in the last poll. I wonder if that's the consequence of the things we've been saying on this program here,
Yeah. So yeah, certainly digital connectivity within my supply chain is coming up very high. So yeah, what's your thoughts around that one, Paul?
Not unexpected, and we have done work on this for the past 30 years. I mean, there are technologies that go back 30 years, even more, on digital connectivity, and of course, Industry 4.0 entirely. I mean, it's almost that is taken for granted almost, isn't it? This, and I totally agree that we need to not forget this good set of technologies driving us forward, as Michael was saying. But the green, I'm very interested to see that people have started getting awareness of the green and the zero carbon, because it's going to become somehow contractually limiting in some cases. You have to start accounting for green calculations together with the cost, quality, and delivery. And I'm interested also on the single supply, single sourcing, the first one, and the fact that we need to be looking beyond the first tier. A little bit on this, I have done a little bit of work together with Sai and other colleagues on deployment of the tooling companies. And we found that there is a quite considerable difference between tier ones and tier twos and tier threes. We've been talking to some super users, people who own supply chain over the last few weeks. And that point was made again and again by super users from different supply chains in the UK. So therefore, this is a serious point. Getting the tier twos and the tier threes to get the best advancement of capability to get to close the gap that there is at the moment between tier twos and three and tier ones. I think it's a significant task ahead, and I would absolutely relate to that. The rest, I think we discussed about reshoring and so on. Yeah.
Excellent. Michael, it'd be interesting to hear from yourself just on reducing environmental impact and your thoughts on that one sort of coming through, and then we'll have some closing statements for everyone. So, Michael, over to you on your thoughts on that.
Well, I mean, I think it's kind of encouraging to see that gets quite a high score, and I think, as I say, I do feel it's an important area, and it will be increasingly important as time goes by. I mean, my eyes have been drawn to the low score, actually, against changing supply chain model in light of Brexit and COVID, and I guess I don't know. I wonder whether that is more to do with the fact that the situation is maybe a little bit fluid and unclear, rather than because those aren't concerns. But yeah, I mean that's just speculation on my part. But I mean, absolutely on the green agenda, it's critical, and it draws in the local sourcing and the reshoring and all those aspects as well. And I've presented a mixed picture on digital, but I guess the digitalization does link, or can be used to link to the green agenda as well, because one thing we can get from digital is a hell of a lot more data on what the real impacts are.
Brilliant. John, before we sort of do closing statements, does this sort of mirror what Network Rail will be looking at in the next 1 to 2 years? Is there anything surprising there from your point of view?
Not at all. I think I did a sort of bird's eye view of the assessment with Paul of our supply chain. I think it was last week, Paul. I can't believe it's a week gone already. And basically, one of the things that we focused on was, what are the sort of key priorities in the next 1 to 2 years? And I think with the work that we've done with SCI and the assessment tool, it really does sort of focus on, digitizing our connection between, how we integrate our systems better between, the demand flows, and getting that visibility to our suppliers to make better decisions around stock holdings and, buying from their suppliers and, making them more aware of what stock we have. Because I think it was brought up at the very beginning of the of this session. I can't remember if it was Paul or Michael that referred to it, but when changes occur, stock, wherever that may sit, is a massive overhead for either the buying organization or the supplying organization. And if those stocks are basically, tying up cash flow, and because actually products now change because of a disturbance event, or the priorities change from that particular market, how can you get that visibility to be able to make better business decisions so that you're not reliant on people buying the same things day in, week in, year out? And I think that's the thing for me about, it's not just about having connectivity, it's about the information that passes through, as the big data, as it were, and how people can make better business decisions at both ends of the supply chain.
Excellent. I think it's a great time now for some closing statements. So a very quick, brief one from each of you. So, Si, just a sort of very quick summary of resilience today.
Yeah, all I would say is, as we've said, there's more than one element to resilience. There's a number of areas. It's about having a strategic intent within the organisation to make sure your business is capable of withstanding external shocks. You can't legislate for everything. I appreciate that. If you do that, you'll soon run out of money. But what you can do is you can take a You can do some what if scenario planning. You can look at the 6 planks of resilience as we see them and say, okay, are we covered in those areas? Because that gives you a pretty good chance of being able to withstand virtually anything that would come along.
Fantastic. Michael, closing statement from yourself?
Well, I mean, I think it's been a very interesting discussion. I think what it highlights is that there's a lot of complexity here. There's some difficult issues, some of which there are nice answers to, some of which there just aren't obvious answers to. And I just think it's interesting that there's a huge amount of emphasis on things like technological solutions, manufacturing technology, all this good stuff that happens in HV and Catapult and universities and elsewhere. There's a lot less emphasis on these type of things, supply chain resilience, considerations of how to manage these complex interactions, and I just think it's an interesting point that maybe we could increase emphasis on some of these subject areas.
Yeah, fantastic. Paul?
Yeah, I agree with Michael on this entirely. For me, it was very, very interesting hearing all the questions and all the points, and the polls were really, really on the money. It's a journey as well. I need to say, changing profile of requirements coming through. And sometimes companies have this concern that there is all this kind of problems ahead and all these challenges, but you're not alone. Companies are not alone. We can find collaborations, we can find knowledge bits, technological in the HVMC, catapults, universities. I agree, Michael's point is absolutely valid. The softer aspects, perhaps organizational, strategic bits, they need to be looked at again, and they don't cost a lot of money. We can do a lot quickly, I think, because it doesn't need the investment that technology typically needs to readjust strategy. So we need to be more agile ourselves, seek out solutions, and if somebody has got something we can actually benefit from, hey, step forward and say, I'm interested in this, I would like to see how to apply it. But highly encouraged by what I heard, and really very interesting discussion.
Thank you very much. John?
Yeah, for some reason, my picture's gone. I have no idea what's going on with technology, so as you can probably appreciate, I'm not i4 point ready at all. But I think the one thing I would take away from this session, and the sort of giving any advice, is the intimacy bit and actually getting to know your suppliers. I think start off with the basics and really start to understand, what your suppliers are, where they are in terms of their journey, and how they can align themselves to what you're trying to achieve. Because either that gives them an opportunity to make better business decisions about whether they want to work with you as a company, as a company of choice or not. And I think really sort of understand the basics. I think because there's a lot of information that's been discussed on this, but I think that having that intimacy as a starter for 10 is absolutely what I would encourage all organisations to do with their suppliers.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Well, I'd like to take this chance now to actually personally thank all the panelists. They've given up their time to support this event. I think you'll all agree they've brought a huge wealth of knowledge, experience, and also thanks for everyone that's been on this, listening in. Without you there, there's just been 5 people sat in a virtual room in silence. Well, probably not in silence. We'd have been talking amongst ourselves about supply chain, but certainly not as an interesting conversation without your questions. If we didn't get round to answering any of your questions, or you've got any other questions, or you want to talk about supply chains, please get in touch and we'll get back to you offline. And I hope you're looking ahead for the rest of the conference. We've got 2 great panels, discussions coming up. I think after lunch there's one on SMEs and skills at 12:45 and net zero at 2:15. I'd strongly recommend both of them, particularly around the net zero, where it actually came quite high in our final poll, so you must have some interest in it. I'd like to hand you back over now to Aaron.
Thank you, Steve, and all our panelists. There's certainly an awful lot to take away from that session. We're now going to have a lunch break, and we'll be back here at 12:45 when we'll be hearing from Neil Smith, Head of Manufacturing Support Services at the MTC. Neil will be joined by an expert panel drawn from industry, academia, and across the UK Catapult family on how we'll rapidly transfer skills based on new technologies and methodologies into the workforce, and in particular amongst SMEs. Please be aware that we'll be closing this webinar, and we will be back after lunch. To access the afternoon session, please refer to your interactive event guide for the link to join us just before 12:45. See you then.